Welcome to the RealTea podcast, brought to you by Tennessee Realtors and sponsored by Rule First, helping you live closer to what matters. I'm your host, Angela Shields. This podcast is created for Tennessee Realtors to get the tea on all things real estate in Tennessee. We'll bring you engaging conversations with esteemed guests in the real estate industry and cover a wide array of topics, including current events, governmental affairs, education, and legal updates. All right, we are so excited to have Matt Russell back with us. I'm going to call this part two.
Back again, yeah.
Back again as a follow-up because we are at the end of our legislative session. And we promised to have you come back and talk about all of the great things we've done. I'm going to say all the great things because we've had some really great wins.
I think there were a lot of wins this year for the industry, for sure.
So let's just jump in and talk about all the great accomplishments that we've had.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, we had two of our bills this year. I think we talked about in an earlier episode, but the continuing education, the Wholesaling Bill. We are also part of a coalition that pushed for the constitutional amendment to ban state property tax. There was a bill regarding state regulation of wetlands, or the deregulation, I guess I should say. There was a bill regarding squatters in commercial properties. It was a big win for commercial landlords. And, there were some bills around affordable and workforce housing.
So you were busy.
It was a busy session, but it was good. It's always good to get some wins, for sure.
Time to take a vacation.
Yeah, for sure.
I hope you're doing something fun. Okay, so let's break them all down. So let's start with the education bill. We get a lot of questions on why we thought that was necessary, why that's a good thing, who it impacts. Let's just kind of break that down a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I think that was brought by a local association or the government affairs. I don't remember the origins of it. But, at the end of the day, obviously, our principal brokers or managing brokers are tasked with managing and overseeing their associate brokers or affiliate brokers. And if they have to make sure that those brokers are following the rules, laws, and regulations, those change on a yearly, if not monthly basis, right? And if those principal managing brokers aren't staying up to date on those changes, how can they be expected to make sure that their team are also following those rules, regulations? So I think the association, the Government Affairs Committee, thought it was important to make sure that any principal broker that was managing brokers stayed up to date and got that same continuing education that the folks they're managing have. Right.
We see that a lot with code of ethics, even with things that get turned in, and you can almost track it where if they come from an office that's managed by a broker, if the broker's not staying up with the changes, you can kind of track that where it's important that they are following it and keeping up with it.
Yeah, for sure. And I think obviously you could easily get in trouble, right? If one of your brokers comes to you and asks you a question and you're tasked with giving them a proper response, but you are outdated on your continuing education, you could very easily give them a wrong answer, which will then get them in trouble and then likely could get you in trouble as well. So it's definitely important to stay up to date on all that.
Absolutely. And then the other thing, we get a lot of questions, not just from our members, but also from the public, is wholesaling. So let's talk about what we've done with wholesaling.
Yeah, I think one word on that: transparency.
Yes.
Right. Wholesaling is here. Folks are not taking advantage, but they are partaking in that practice. And so our bill didn't seek to limit or increase anything in the wholesaling. We just sought transparency, right? I think if you are in a wholesale transaction, you just need to make sure that you disclose that to the seller and the buyer. Anytime that consumers can have more information and can have more transparency, that's good for them. And I think at the end of the day, when you look at regulations or laws around industry, the consumer should be on the forefront, right? How does this impact them? And I think that was a very simple bill that all it did was to say, look, we're not changing anything you do currently with wholesaling. Just make sure you disclose it. And there were 3 different disclosures in that bill of when it had to be disclosed. But I think, I've heard from some folks in the industry that said, most wholesalers are doing this now. And if you're not, you should have been doing it anyway. So I think it was a pretty simple bill for just transparency.
And also explaining it, because I think sometimes it's probably the ones who were not doing it properly that were not explaining it. And I think that is where we get the questions, is because people don't understand what wholesaling actually is.
For sure. I think some consumers, they may not have an issue being involved in a wholesale transaction. I think a lot of times where the problem arose was they weren't aware. Right. You may not have an issue with the situation, but if you're left in the dark about a situation, that definitely kind of gives you some concern sometimes.
Especially when you find out later, because you're thinking, what was I taken advantage of? And
yeah, for sure. And I think just being open and transparent, really in life or any transaction, is probably a good thing to do.
Actually, comes back to the code of ethics too, if you're a realtor. So it is very important. Let's talk about the estate property tax amendment, because that's a big one.
I think that's huge. Everybody says, "Oh, Tennessee, we don't have a state property tax. It's levied at the local levels," and that is true. But currently, in the law books, we do have a state property tax. It's just zero, and it's been set at zero for decades. But there's nothing that say that if the state were to fall on a tough economic time, they couldn't just go back there and with a simple majority vote levy a state property tax. That's been done in the past. And a lot of property owners got into tough times because of that. So all this does is it allows the citizens, when they go to vote for the governor's race in 2026, it'll be on the ballot for them to vote whether or not they'd like to ban in the Constitution a state property tax.
When we were at MIPA, that was one of our talking points and was so attractive to people who are outside of the U.S. When we told them that was something we were fighting for, we were working on, they were so excited to hear that. And it was so interesting. We actually did an episode on this, our last episode, and talked about that over in other countries, it's amazing how much tax they pay when they transact with property.
Yeah, for sure. I think it'll be we have a lot of great things to say about the state of Tennessee. Obviously, no income tax, no inheritance tax. We have a lot of good things. I think this is just another kind of talking point that we can pitch. I think it will allow folks to continue to age in their home, allow, long-term ownership. You do hear that a lot of where folks, as they get older, that property tax increases. It does really hurt them. So I think this is a great step to really allow folks to continue that home ownership.
It's exciting to watch that process. For those that don't understand the process, when you have a bill like this, will you explain that? Because this has to go to the public to actually vote on.
For sure. So in order to amend the state constitution, it is an easy process, but it is a hard process at the same time.
And long.
Long. You have to pass 2 consecutive general assemblies. So they passed it 2024. It passed with a 50% majority. Then we have to come back to the new General Assembly. You have to pass it with 2/3 majority. And then from there, it has to go to the next available statewide ballot, which would be 2026. And then it has to get 50% there. But you also have to have, and I don't know that for sure, but you have to have a certain number of votes off of the governors. So it is very important for us to get the word out that, hey, this is on the ballot, let's vote for it. Because if it doesn't hit the number of votes required, it doesn't really matter how big it passes, right? So we want to make sure that when people vote for governor, they vote for this and they vote yes.
Gotcha. So, yeah, so it's not a simple thing that we've been working on. This is a long process, and it's something we have to stay on top of.
It's been a long process for sure, and obviously part of a coalition. We've had several meetings about it, and it's been interesting. The meetings have been, okay, how do we get the votes in the General Assembly? And now those conversations are turning to, well, what can we do to educate the 7 million Tennesseans that when they go vote for governor in 2026, that they also vote for this property tax amendment.
And when you say coalition, it's not just the realtors who are working on this. We have other partners.
Yeah, we're just part of a coalition, mainly led by Farm Bureau. Obviously, that's very important to their members. But you have Farm Bureau, Americans for Prosperity, the Beacon Center, Tennessee Realtors, Chamber of Commerce, and the NFIB. And there may be some other groups, but those are kind of the ones that have been in the meetings and kind of been pushing for it.
Yeah, it's always fun to be part of a larger group that we all see the same
For sure.
Importance in it. So that's exciting. The other thing that you mentioned was about commercial property. And I always like to point out that we're not just focused on residential property. There's other things that we do focus on having to do with our commercial members. So let's talk about those issues.
Yeah. So a couple years back, there was a bill everyone kind of dubbed the anti-squatter bill. And that did address the ability for property owners to have an easier, a smoother process to get squatters out. It's something that, if you've really turned on the news or turned on social media, you've seen it across the country to where property owners are having an issue with squatters and not having the ability to do anything about it, right? And so a couple years back, there was a bill passed that affected residential. This General Assembly, the same bill went through, and it was for commercial properties. And so it extended those same rights and peace of mind to commercial property owners that they can now have this smoother process to get squatters out of their properties.
That's great because,
sure.
Like you said, there's been many stories where it's hard. It's been hard in the past, and it shouldn't be that way.
Well, for sure.
Yeah, that's exciting. The last time we did the podcast, you talked about affordable housing, and the governor had some initiatives that he was working on. Do you have updates on anything having to do with affordable housing and where we're at today?
Yeah, we talked about it. There were two kind of line items in the governor's budget. Unfortunately, neither of those survived the legislative budget process, for reasons across the board. And that is unfortunate, but I think it's something that's still top of mind for a lot of folks and something that we can continue working on. There was a bill passed regarding affordable housing and workforce housing, and that kind of made it easier for local governments to incentivize those projects. It added affordable and workforce housing projects to a list of projects that are eligible for TIFs and pilots, and talked about brownfield redevelopment. So while the big budget line items didn't get through, there was some progress towards affordable housing, and I think we talked about it in our first episode. A lot of people talk about affordable housing, and there are a lot of things that can be done, but it is an issue that I think a lot of folks are still trying to get their mind around of what is the government's role versus private industry. So I think the bill that we saw pass was a good step towards that, and I think it's something that we can continue to push in the future.
Yeah, and I know that he had a lot of focus on all of the devastation that happened with the hurricanes and all of the tornadoes. And I don't know if it's just me, but it feels like that he had more this past year that he's been having to deal with, and it seems like they just keep hitting Tennessee like crazy. So it's going to be interesting to see, on that note, what they keep focusing on too with all of the devastation and everything.
Yeah, I think even, Hurricane Helene up in East Tennessee had a lot of relief for them this year. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw more bills or, more things coming through. I do think at the end of the day, there's probably still a lot to be done. I think the latest storm that came through, I know the Realtors Relief Foundation activated on that. So I think that's a great thing that our members, maybe a small way that we can help, help those communities affected.
Yeah, we're constantly on the lookout for that. But what do you see as being the key focus going into next year? I know we're starting to ask the associations for what they're seeing, but do you see any carryovers or anything that you're already starting to hear about?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Obviously, it'll be Governor Lee's last General Assembly as governor as we roll into election season next year. So it'll be interesting to kind of see what unfinished business he thinks. I do think we'll still continue to see a lot of affordable housing initiatives, really from everyone. I do think you'll probably see more talk about education freedom scholarships. I think that rollout had about 38,000 applications, so I think that'll be something else that's talked about. But other than that, I think right now everyone's just trying to catch their breath and take a few vacations before they really
no special
start.
sessions.
No, yeah. Fingers crossed. No
Fingers
special
crossed.
sessions.
Rule First not only lends rule, but lives rule too. And as a cooperative, they can offer products and services other lenders aren't able to. From construction to land loans to financing homes in the country, they'll walk you through the process to make your rural dreams a reality. And because community matters, they're committed to investing in the communities they're a part of. Learn how you can get closer to what matters at rulefirst.com. Rule First is a registered trademark of Farm Credit Mid-America, NMLS 407249. Equal housing lender, loans subject to approval and eligibility. So, Matt, there are issues. We've talked about all the positive issues, the things that we've been successful with. I know that we have issues every year that we have to educate the legislators on and why they are not necessarily great ideas.
Right.
What are some of those?
Yeah, for sure. I think oftentimes some of the biggest accomplishments you have are stopping bad bills. This year we had a couple impact fee bills.
Every year.
Every year. We thought we might have reached an end of that, but yeah, had a few more of those. There's actually a bill out of Union County that would have drastically increased building permits. And obviously any new government fees just increases the cost of housing. And then landlord registry bills again. I think all three of those issues are something that we'll continue to see. I think that's why it's important for our members to participate in the TMPC program, down the hill, just get involved, because I think any education that we can give the General Assembly outside of the legislature, the General Assembly sessions, and just let them know why these issues are important. And, not only do they affect our industry, but they affect consumers as well.
Because they add on to the cost or the affordable housing. And wouldn't you say that a lot of times the fees that where they're trying to raise money for their local municipalities, it's going to a select few instead of everyone?
Yeah, for sure. I think any time that you add any type of government fee, the end payer of that is the purchaser. Mm-hmm. I think obviously we talked a little bit about a wetlands bill earlier. 2023, there was a Supreme Court ruling that said states could regulate wetlands. There was a bill that passed this year that kind of set up 4 different categories of isolated wetlands in the state and kind of set up the regulation or the deregulation of some of that. And at the end of the day, that increased property rights and it decreased regulatory fees, which help developers. It helps builders, and at the end of the day, it helps the end user, which are home buyers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm sure we'll be looking at always keeping the legislators educated, which I think it's important for everybody to know that's what you all are doing there, because we like to remind members that if you weren't there, they're not going to have the time to go down and educate the legislators on a daily basis, right? Their job's to sell real estate. So I think it's important that you kind of bring it back to circle that that's why you're here with us and at the Capitol every day and doing all that you do throughout the year is to make sure that we are looking out for their best interests.
For sure. And I always, my saying that I always tell folks are, if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. So I do think the advocacy that we do for the association is important, but not to forget that the advocacy of our membership is also very important, right? Our team can only do so much down there. They really like to hear from our members.
Yes.
And our members obviously are well known in their communities. They're well respected. So anytime, our members can get involved in that process, it's great.
And I would say on all 3 levels.
For sure.
Local, state, and national.
I would probably argue that more so even at the local level,
Yeah.
right? I think all locals are all politics are local. And so I do think our members, if they want to get involved, that first step could maybe, just go to a city council meeting, go to a, county commission meeting, just see how it works. Mm-hmm. And then as you work your levels up, definitely get involved.
So that's a great segue, because one of the things that we do, I think every other year, is the candidate training. for those that are interested in running for an office when you say get involved. And you are really the one who helps us put that on. So let's talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, for sure. It was a fun program that we, I guess, started 2 years ago. I think the intent is to try and do it in off election years. I think we talked about it at the first one that if you're currently running, that you should be campaigning. You shouldn't be sitting here. So that's why we're doing it that way. But yeah, Jonathan and I have been starting the initial planning on that. NAR has a great kind of guideline for that. And what we did 2 years ago was we took their guidelines and we adapted it to what works for us here locally. And it was fun. I think we had a full room of 20, 30, 40 people. I think we got a lot of positive feedback. So we're set to roll session 2, class 2 out in October, late October. So I guess keep an eye out for that. Get signed up if you have interest in running for anything. We try to make it so high level that it impacts everyone, but yet we're still kind of getting granular in the fact that maybe you'll walk away with something. But there's a lot to learn if you're wanting to run for office. So hopefully everyone can join us.
I think some that took your class actually were successful in obtaining a position and serving.
I don't know. Hopefully.
I believe so.
Hopefully they learned something.
I'm not going to call it the names because I don't want to be wrong, but I believe so.
And I know I've had conversations with current members that have aspirations to run for something, and we always encourage our members to get involved, but then also understand how the political process works, but then also give them a little insight about how our political process at the association works, and how we can be beneficial to them, or how we may or may not get involved in certain races. So hopefully everybody comes out. Yeah.
And I think it also gives you an opportunity to understand how we select candidates and that we're supporting, or stay with candidates that are realtor friendly. I guess one little thing to put the asterisk is just because you go through the process doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be the candidate of choice, those types of things.
Yeah, I think we tried to stress that in our last meeting. Obviously, when RPAC goes through their process on who they're going to support, they have kind of parameters about how they're grading candidates. So yeah, just because you're a member doesn't necessarily mean you'll get the support. But come out to the class, learn what you can, and get ready to go.
Yeah, yeah. So do you see, I guess kind of wrapping it up, you see 26 being a busy year for us?
I think so. I think anytime that campaigns are cranking, for sure, and then even more so because we have a governor's race. Obviously, Governor Lee is term limited, so we'll see who gets in that race. I know Congressman Rose is the only announced candidate right now. I think Senator Blackburn is definitely eyeing it, and I'm sure there will be others that get in that race. So that's something that we'll definitely keep an eye on and be involved with.
Yeah. It's going to be always interesting and fun to watch.
Always is, yeah.
Yeah. So I asked you last time about the tea that you put in your cup, so that's why we didn't start out with that question, because that is our tradition. But I do appreciate everything that you and the firm does. I do want to say that just because the session's over, that doesn't mean you guys stop what you're doing for us. Y'all stay busy all year long. But I hope you get a good vacation.
Yeah, we're definitely have some fun trips planned. But yeah, I think outside of session, that's definitely where you have you're laying the groundwork for the next session. If you don't lay solid groundwork, you won't be as successful the next session. So obviously our locals are coming up with their ideas. Government Affairs is going through things. RPAC is cranking up. Obviously we're working on candidate school. So there's a lot going on for sure.
And before we do wrap it up, if a member has an idea of something they think that we ought to be focusing on, what do we want them to do?
Oh, Addison would get mad if I didn't get this right. I believe the proper process is that they need to take their idea to their local association,
That's right.
Government Affairs, or from there, if they vote to support it, it comes up to the state Government
That's
Affairs. Right. And then state Government Affairs votes to whether support it. And then obviously Government Affairs is looking at how it impacts statewide. I think some folks, often ask, like, well, why didn't Government Affairs support this? Sometimes if it's a hyper local issue, it may not be something that government affairs takes up. But I do know they are very diligent about everything that comes up. They have a lot of discussions. I think they just recently met, if I'm not mistaken. So I know they're working hard and always open to ideas to talk about.
That is exactly right. And the way to kind of make it make sense is we have 36,000 some odd members. And so if every member had an idea, it would be impossible to chase every idea. So it's just a process to make sure that it is more vetted going through the local association and that it means something to that local association to be able to come up. And that way it stays member driven is what we're really focused on.
For sure.
And it is members making the decision so that it stays that way.
I've sat through a lot of the government affairs committees and I've sat through issues where they will talk for what seems like an hour on an issue. And they want to make sure they get it right.
Right.
So,
and sometimes come back to the next meeting and continue talking about it. So, but you are right about that. Well, great. So I think you've done a great job this year. And again, we appreciate everything you do and look forward to gearing up for next year and prepping for it.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today on the RealTea podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues. Then visit tnrealtors.com to submit your questions and topics for future episodes of the RealTea podcast. Thanks for listening.